Hey guys, Aaron here. Welcome back to the Python Django tutorial series where we're showing you how to build a website using Django. And if you don't remember, this is what we're building. We're re-implementing the Hacker Shack website, which has a few features like blog posts, an about page, a contact page. And then we're also adding a couple more things like user registration and comments on those blog posts. So let's get started. In this episode, we're going to be talking about URL routes and how to create templates for new front-end pages. I added one thing since the last tutorial. I created this scripts folder with a show virtual env tag.sh file. If you don't remember, these are the few commands that you need to add to your zshrc file, which show the tag for the virtual environment that you're currently running. And just to show you what that looks like, if I open up my terminal here, you can see I have a tag that shows that. So if you want to, you can just copy paste this into your zshrc file, and you will get that tag. There's one thing that I need to do in my interpreter in order to get autocomplete working. So I'm using VS Code for this. You'll notice that I have this little Python. I don't know if you can see this because it might be cut off with the screen, but I have this Python 3.7.3 tag down here. If I click on that, I can go in and select our virtual environment. So if I just double check what virtual environment I'm running, looks like it's Hacker Shack website. And I think I changed this since the last tutorial, but you can go into here and then just select the correct one that you want. So this will basically pick up all your Python dependencies and use them in your editor to autocomplete. If I go to my urls.py file in the Hacker Shack website, you can see that I already have one path defined for a route. If I start up my server here, and if you don't remember how to do that, it's just python manage.py run server. I can go into a new Chrome window and type localhost to visit localhost 8000 to visit the web page. You'll be greeted with this little nice UI right here. I can go to the admin console, which is that route that we've defined, and see that we already have a Django admin page set up for us. So if I were to go back into our URL params here and just comment this out, save that, and reload this page, nothing appears. It just redirects me back to the main page here. And that's because we've disabled this route. So I'm going to uncomment this, and we'll use this a little bit later. But I'm just going to add my own view for now, which I'm going to use for the home page. To do that, I go to my Hacker Shack folder, and I'm going to create a new file called views. So I'll save that, and I'm going to add a couple things to this file. I'm going to import a new class. So I'll just say from Django.http import HTTP response. And then I'm going to add a new function here called index. And index takes a request, which is the request that's made by the consumer that's hitting your web page. And I'm going to return a response. I'll instantiate one of these classes, and let's just return homepage. I have a view, and now I need to expose this view. And if I go back to this web page here and hit the homepage, it still shows this Django UI here. Let me just go back to my URLs page, and I'm going to add another path. So right underneath this, I'll say path, and I want this to be the root. So I'll just say empty string, which means it's the root URL. So there's nothing after localhost here. If I wanted to make it something like home, I would go to this and then just type in home like this. But I just want it to be an empty URL, or the root URL for this website. So I'll change it to an empty string. And then I also need to import the views that I just created. I'm going to say from local directory, import views. And then I will say views.index, because that function that we just created was called index. and I'm going to name this index. I'll save that. And now if I reload this page, you should see homepage. So going back to the code here, we're just returning an HTTP response with a text body that includes the string homepage. So that's great, but usually you want to see some HTML with CSS styling the HTML and maybe some JavaScript to run the web page. Let's create another folder inside of Hacker Shack website and call this templates. And inside of templates, we're going to create a base.html file. And we're also going to create a home, or maybe just an index.html file. Django has this concept of templated HTML files. You can basically create tags in your HTML files where you can extend them later with other HTML files, or inject variables into your page, or iterate over things. You can do a bunch of different things. So I'm going to create a template for our base page, and all of our other pages will extend this. And we're going to have some information in here like our title for our page. There's going to be a tag for the main body, and also, maybe some metadata and scripts. I'm just going to copy this in right now, and this is going to be my base page. In here, like I said, we have a title, and this is the head component of our HTML page. So we'll probably add other things in here, like maybe some style sheets or scripts, but we'll leave it as is for now. The title of my page is going to be called Hacker Shack, but you'll notice there's another tag in here which says we can inject whatever value we want into this by sub-templates if we want. But I'll leave it as Hacker Shack for the main page. And then we also have a body tag with some main content. You'll notice that there's also another block right here, which will, again, use sub-templates to extend this and overwrite this with our own custom content. So that looks good for our base HTML. And then for our index HTML, let's just do something really simple. In order to say that this template extends the base, we're going to add a tag here and write extends, single quotes, base.html. And then we'll close this with a % sign and a closing bracket. If I save this and I were to display this, there would be nothing on the page. So we probably also want to add some content. And to do that, I'm going to add another tag here. If I remember correctly, this was called content. So I can just copy paste this actually. I don't need to retype it. And I'll just paste this in here. And then maybe for the content of this page for now, I'll just stub this out with template homepage. And then maybe the last thing that we want to do for this is create a title. So I'm going to copy this block as well, go back to our index page and add that. For this page, maybe we'll call it home. And, I put text in both of these, but you can also use HTML if you want. Maybe I'll say I want to put an H1 tag. Sorry, it's lowercase h1. If you're not familiar with HTML, this is basically just a heading. So the heading of this page will be template homepage. And we'll change all this later when we start styling the web page, but for now, this will be good for us. And then the other thing that we have to do is go into our settings file, and we need to tell Django which folder to look in when we reference our template HTML files. The settings file, if you're not familiar with it, it's just basically a file where you can define a bunch of different settings for your Django application. Some of these things are supported by default by Django. And like templates, for example, is something we're going to modify here, but you can see you can add middleware. So if I were to create a new class that extends some of the Django middleware, I could add it in here. I can install more apps, which we'll do later. There's a bunch of different things you can do, but you can also add your own settings. I'm going to add my own setting for project directory. And this is going to correspond with our current directory that we're working out of right now. So by default, the base directory references our directory with our manage.py file. but we want to say our project directory is actually that folder that I created in the last tutorial. So to do that, I'm going to say project directory equals os.join, and I'm going to pass in base directory as the directory of our root, and then the name of our project directory, which in this case is Hacker Shack website. And then I'll save that. Now, if I go down to my templates setting, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to need to specify the path to our templates folder that I just created here. So I'm going to do os.join again to create another path. I'm going to pass in our project directory and then the name templates, because this templates folder is inside of our project directory. It's actually, instead of os.join, it's os.path.join. So let me just update that real quick. And now if I go back to our URLs page right here, I can modify this to point at our home page as the path for the index route. To do that, all I need to do is import another helper class. We're going to say this is import from Django, django.views.generic.base. And we're going to import template view because we're going to be rendering a template. Remove views.index here, and I'm going to replace that with template view.asView. And we're going to say the template name is equal to home.html. And then let me go back to my terminal here, and I'm going to say manage run server. So our server is now running, and if I refresh the index page, I get an error, which probably means I misconfigured something. You can troubleshoot these errors by looking at some of the information that's output by Django here. It said Django tried to load these templates in this order, but it failed. And the first path that it looks at is this path right here. So it says Django website tutorial, Hacker Shack website templates home. So that looks right, but maybe I have a typo somewhere. So let's just go back and double check that. Oh, and right, so this is index.html instead of home.html. So that's why I can't find the file. And now if I refresh, I can see my new template. Maybe one more thing we can do to remove some of this rendering logic from our URLs file is go into the views file right here. We'll say from Django.template import loader. And then we're going to go into our index and say template equals loader.getTemplate. And we'll specify our index.html as the template. And then we can say return HTTP response with our template.render. We'll pass in an empty dictionary and the request as the second argument. So right now, this isn't really doing much, but eventually you can pass in data from your route in order to render the template. In the future, we'll probably have things on the homepage like, maybe spotlighted content or something like that, where we'll want to inject data into that template for the index page. But for now, we'll just leave this as is. I'll need to go back to our URLs file and revert back to what I had initially. So now if I save this and reload the homepage, you'll see that it still renders that template for us. There's actually a shorthand for doing this. So I can also say from Django.shortcuts import render. And again, this is just a convenience wrapper for those two lines. So I can return render where I pass in my request and the name of the template, which in this case is index.html. Now, in this particular function, if I hover over this, you'll see that context is an optional argument, so I don't have to pass that if I don't want to. And since we're not passing any data yet, I'll just ignore that and remove what I had earlier. Let's now add a couple more pages and a navbar to the top of our homepage. So I'm just going to create two more files, about.html, and I'll create a contact.html. And then I think I'm also going to create one more file called navbar.html. This will be the navbar that helps us navigate between the pages. In this navbar.html, maybe we'll have a div. Inside this div, I'll have a span and maybe 3 of those spans. And then each one will have a element in it. So one link for home, one for about, and one for contact. Now I'm going to go to my base, and my navbar will probably always be in my base template. So I'm going to include that there. And to do that, I just add another one of these tags and say include space, single quotes, navbar.html. And now if I go to my web page and refresh this, I can see my navbar at the top. Now I haven't set up, actually I have a typo there, but I haven't set up any links for these yet. I'm going to have to create a couple more routes for the about page and contact. I'll go into my views file right here, and I can just remove some of this stuff because we're not using it right now. And let me just create a about page. And this will be exactly the same as the index, except we're just switching up a few things like the function name and the path to the file. So we can copy that once, change it, and then copy again for the contact page. And let me just change this. Now we can go to our URLs and let's create 2 more URLs for both of these pages. So I'll name one about, and this will have the path about. We can reference that function that we just created, and then we'll create one for contact as well. And we'll name this route contact. Now if we refresh, we can go to /about, which has nothing in it yet, which is right. So I can go into my HTML and maybe just copy what's in the index file, put that in the about, and we'll say about, and change the title to about as well. And then we can also put that in the contact page. All right, so now we have our about page, and we can set up the links by going to the navbar. There are a couple things that we have to do in order to make these links work. First one is just create a link that points to the home page. And to do that, I can add an anchor tag and set the href to the home page. Now I can do this, which, slash, which is a relative URL, and it would navigate to the home page. So let me just demonstrate that. So if I go refresh this, I can click on home and it would bring me back to the home page. But the problem with that is URLs change quite a bit on web projects. So you want to make this dynamic, which means whenever I change the definition of the URL that points to this particular view, so like if I change this to home or something like that, it will keep the same redirect, but it would just redirect to a different URL. There's a function called URL that you can use to reverse look up the URL for a specific name. So in my case, my home is called index. So if I create this tag with URL as the function and index as the reverse lookup, I can save that, refresh, and now if I click on home, it still takes me to home. And if I go to a different page, it'll take me back to home. If I were to go into my URLs and change this to something else, like maybe home, like I was mentioning earlier, and I go back to the about page, if I click on home, it takes me to the home URL. So you only have to change that URL in one place, but it would update in all of your template code. So you definitely want to use that helper function whenever possible. I can do this for all of our items in the navbar. but I'm just going to switch out these reverse lookups for all of these pages. If I click on any of these, they'll take me to the correct page. And one more thing we can do is, maybe if we're on the home page, we won't have the option to re-navigate to the home page, so we can just gray this out. And we can do that by creating some if logic in this template. Now, you can also create helper functions to do this, so you don't have to nest a bunch of logic in your Django templates. But for now, I think to make this simple, I'm just going to quickly write some Django template logic in here. To do an if statement, first you have to, if you're using something like this URL function, you have to assign that to a value. I'm going to say URL index as index URL. This creates a index URL variable, and I'll copy that for these other spans as well. And then before this anchor tag, I can add another tag that says if request.path is equal to index URL, I can make this a element with no link. I can say otherwise use this anchor tag that I defined earlier, and then I can close that if statement by typing end if right here. So if I save this and then reload this, you'll notice that home is now grayed out on the home page, and if I go to about, it's re-enabled. So let me just do this for all of the other routes as well. And one more thing I should mention is you can also reference this variable instead of doing the method lookup again. I can reference variables by using double tags. All right, now if I navigate between these different pages, you can see that the active page gets grayed out and the other ones become active. I think that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to be looking at creating users and adding a login and register page. Thanks again for watching. If you are interested in getting the code for this tutorial, make sure to check out the Patreon page where we're linking all of the code for this project. But until then, I'll see you next time.